The Park Café wasn't just a restaurant. It was a stage where the city's elite came to see and be seen. Tucked between rows of perfectly manicured trees and the gentle hum of a nearby fountain, it buzzed with life every single day. Midday sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on white tablecloths and polished silverware. Waiters in crisp uniforms weaved gracefully between tables, balancing trays of artisan dishes and freshly brewed coffee. The air smelled of warm bread, exotic spices, and the faint sweetness of blooming flowers that bordered the patio. For the wealthy patrons who filled the cafe, this was routine. Another expensive lunch. Another opportunity to network, to be photographed, to remind the world of their place in the social hierarchy. Laughter rang out, but it was the polished laughter of people performing for an invisible audience. Conversations buzzed about stock prices, vacation homes, and the latest gossip from the country. But for one man, none of this seemed remarkable. At a prime table in the center sat Bernard Green. The name alone carried weight in this city. Bernard had built his empire from scratch, starting with a single real estate investment in his 20s and expanding into ventures that few could even dream of. Hotels, tech startups, international holdings. His portfolio was as diverse as it was vast. At 72, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned not just his world, but perhaps the worlds of everyone around him. His sharp navy suit was tailored to perfection, his gold-rimmed glasses catching the light as he moved. Everything about him screamed success. Yet today, as he glanced at the menu, his movements were slow, almost hesitant. The usual spark in his eyes seemed dimmed by something invisible but heavy. Opposite him sat Marissa, his much younger wife. She was the kind of woman who turned heads simply by existing. Jet black hair that fell in perfect waves, high cheekbones, lips painted a bright red that matched her designer handbag. She seemed plucked straight out of a magazine cover, impossibly polished and meticulously put together. Every inch of her screamed elegance, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She twirled a diamond bracelet on her wrist absent-mindedly, her attention fixed not on her husband but on her phone screen. Instagram. She scrolled through photos of people who lived lives just like hers, perfect homes, perfect vacations, perfect marriages. At least that's what the photos showed. Bernard watched her for a moment before speaking. "You're distracted again." His voice was calm but pointed. Decades of boardroom battles had taught him how to cut through silence. Marissa looked up and smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I'm right here," she replied sweetly, reaching across the table to place her hand on his. Her touch was light, almost mechanical. "You know how much I enjoy these lunches." Bernard said nothing. He had learned to read people long ago, and Marissa was becoming an open book. The distance between them had grown over the past year, widening with each passing month. She was always somewhere else now, even when she was sitting right in front of him. Nearby, a boy lingered just beyond the patio fence. He was small for his age, 12, maybe 13, his oversized hoodie hanging loosely on a thin frame that hadn't seen a proper meal in days. His dark eyes darted from table to table, scanning plates and pockets, looking for an opportunity, a dropped wallet, an unfinished plate left too close to the edge. Anything. His name was Malik, though no one in the cafe knew him. His face was familiar on this street, a kid with nowhere to go, always on the outskirts of conversations and the edges of concern. He had learned to be invisible, to move through the world without leaving a trace. It was the only way to survive. Malik's stomach growled loudly. He pressed a hand against his belly and moved closer to the railing, his footsteps almost silent against the stone. His eyes landed on Bernard's table. It was the kind of meal he hadn't seen up close in months. A pristine white bowl of soup, steam rising gently. Fresh bread in a silver basket, the crust perfectly golden. A glass of sparkling water catching the afternoon light, bubbles rising in slow motion. His mouth watered just looking at it. Then something unusual happened. Bernard adjusted his glasses and picked up his phone, glancing at what appeared to be an email. It was a brief distraction, just a few seconds, but it was enough. Malik saw Marissa's hand slip into her designer handbag. It seemed casual at first, natural. A woman simply retrieving something. But then her fingers closed around a small vial, hidden in a secret compartment. She pulled it out with practiced ease, her expression never changing. Malik's breath caught. He watched as she twisted the vial open with a casual flick, tilting her hand ever so slightly over the steaming bowl. A clear liquid dripped out, blending with the soup in an instant, disappearing like it had never been there. She stirred it once with the spoon, her movements unhurried, as if she had done this 100 times before. Then she leaned closer to Bernard, her voice low but just audible enough for Malik to hear. "After all the trouble I've gone through," she whispered, "you won't ruin this now." Bernard didn't look up from his phone. He hadn't seen anything, but Malik had. The boy blinked, unsure of what he had just witnessed. Was this real? Could a woman who looked so perfect, sitting in a place so polished, really be doing what he thought? His mind raced, trying to find another explanation. Maybe it was medicine. Maybe it was something harmless. People put things in food all the time, right? But the way she had done it, so secretive, so deliberate, sent a chill down his spine. And those words, "After all the trouble I've gone through." What trouble? What was she planning? Malik's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched lower behind the railing. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. No one else had noticed. No one else had been paying attention. It was just him, a hungry boy hiding in the shadows. The faint growl in his stomach pulled him back to reality, but his eyes remained fixed on the couple. Bernard looked tired, distracted, his spoon hovering over the bowl as he typed something on his phone. Marissa was all charm and poise again, her smile bright, her hand resting on her chin as if she hadn't just whispered something chilling moments ago. Malik could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His instinct screamed to walk away. Why get involved? Who would believe a kid like him? A boy in a threadbare hoodie standing at the edges of a world he wasn't welcome in. He swallowed hard, glancing around at the other patrons. Laughter, chatter, the clinking of glasses. No one cared. No one even noticed him, but his gaze returned to Bernard's spoon, now dipping into the soup. Malik felt his chest tight. It wasn't just his imagination. He had seen her pour something into that bowl. He didn't know what it was, but he knew what would happen if the old man took a bite. His thoughts raced. He didn't know this man. Bernard Green meant nothing to him, but wrong was wrong, and watching someone die when you could stop it, that was a weight Malik wasn't sure he could carry. The moment stretched endlessly, time slowing to a crawl. And then, without thinking, Malik pushed himself off the railing and marched straight toward the table. His legs felt like lead, heavy and uncooperative, but his feet didn't stop. Every step felt like walking through water, but he kept moving. He reached the table just as Bernard's spoon touched his lips. "Don't eat that," the words exploded from Malik's mouth, louder than he intended, cracking with desperation and fear. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The clatter of a dropped fork echoed across the suddenly silent café. Bernard froze, his spoon inches from his lips, his wide eyes locking onto the boy standing before him. Marissa whipped her head around, her expression hardening into something sharp and dangerous. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Malik didn't falter. His voice was shaky but loud enough for everyone to hear. "She put something in your food." "I saw her, don't eat it." Gasps rippled through the cafe as every patron turned toward the scene. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with shock and disbelief. Malik stood his ground, his chest heaving as adrenaline surged through him. He had done it now. There was no going back. Bernard blinked, glancing between the boy and his wife. "What is he talking about, Marissa?" His tone was calm, but his hand trembled slightly as he set the spoon down on the table. Marissa's composure snapped like a rubber band stretched too thin. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. "You little liar," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "How dare you accuse me of something so vile? Who even let you in here?" The words stung, but Malik didn't back down. His eyes remained locked on Bernard's, desperate to make him see the truth. "I saw her. She poured something into your soup when you weren't looking. You can smell it if you don't believe me." Bernard's face paled as he turned toward his wife, his eyes narrowing. "Marissa, what's going on?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. She scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "He's just trying to cause trouble. Look at him. He probably just wants money or food." She spat the words out like they were poison themselves, her gaze flicking to Malik with open disdain. But the boy didn't waver. He stepped closer to the table, his fists clenched. "I'm not lying," he said firmly, his voice rising. "She doesn't want you to know, but I saw everything." Bernard's hand lingered over the bowl, torn between disbelief and the gnawing doubt now creeping into his mind. But something in the boy's tone made him hesitate. The air around the table seemed to thicken. The once lively cafe was now eerily silent, all eyes locked on the unfolding drama, their meals forgotten. Bernard leaned back slightly in his chair, studying the boy with a scrutinizing gaze. His face bore the marks of a man used to people playing games with him, trying to take advantage of his wealth. But this was different. The boy didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Malik, is it?" Bernard asked, his voice steady though a trace of suspicion lingered. The boy nodded. "Yes, I'm telling the truth. Please don't eat it." His voice was soft but insistent. Marissa let out a harsh laugh, crossing her arms as she stared Malik down. "This is absurd," she snapped, her tone icy. "He's just some street kid looking for attention. Are you really going to entertain this nonsense, Bernard?" But Bernard didn't answer her. Instead, he picked up the spoon again, this time holding it closer to his face. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the quiet storm brewing within him. "Marissa," he said slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "You heard him. What exactly is going on here?" Marissa's mask of poise cracked further. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I can't believe you're even asking me that. It's insulting." She turned to the growing crowd, her voice rising. "He's lying. Look at him. He probably doesn't even know who you are. Why would you trust him over me?" The weight of her words hung in the air, but they didn't have the effect she'd hoped for. The crowd was murmuring now, their eyes darting between the three of them. Whispers floated through the air. "Did she really do it? Look at her. She seems nervous. That boy doesn't look like he's making this up." The murmurs only fueled Marissa's fury. She slammed her hands on the table, her polished demeanor gone entirely. "Enough of this. Bernard, eat your damn soup and let's go," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage, but Malik wasn't backing down. He took another step forward, his fists clenched tightly. "If you won't believe me, then call someone to test it," he said, his voice rising with urgency. "You're rich. You've got lawyers, doctors, people who can figure it out, but don't eat it if you do. You'll regret it." Bernard's jaw tightened as he turned back to the bowl. The spoon was still in his hand, but he didn't lift it to his lips. His eyes, tired and calculating, shifted to his wife. "Marissa," he said, his voice low, "you've been acting strange for weeks now. This—" Her face flushed. She stumbled over her words. I don't know what you're talking about. You can't seriously think I'd poison me," Bernard finished for her, his tone razor sharp. The crowd gasped audibly, their whispers growing louder. Malik stood firm, his gaze unwavering. He could feel his heart pounding, but he wouldn't let it show. He'd done what he could. Now it was up to Bernard to make the next move. Marissa straightened up, her expression hardening into something cold and unfamiliar. "This is ridiculous. I don't have to sit here and listen to this nonsense," she said, grabbing her handbag. But before she could leave, Bernard's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength for a man his age. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Not until we get to the bottom of this." The waiter, who had been frozen in place, finally spoke up. "Sir, should I call the police?" The question sent a ripple through the café. And for the first time, Marissa looked genuinely panicked. The waiter's question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "Sir, should I call the police?" Marissa shook her head violently, her perfectly styled hair coming loose from its careful arrangement. "Don't you dare. This is just a misunderstanding. Bernard, you can't seriously." But Bernard raised his hand, silencing her. His eyes never left his wife's face as he addressed the waiter without looking away. "Yes, call them." The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples of shock spread through the cafe. Patrons leaned closer to one another, whispering behind manicured hands. Someone pulled out a phone to record the scene. This was better than anything playing on their televisions. Malik felt a surge of relief so powerful his knees almost buckled, but it was fleeting. The truth wasn't out yet, and the tension was far from over. He stood a few steps back from the table, his hands shaking slightly now that the initial adrenaline was fading. He had done all he could. But doubt crept in like a cold draft. What if the man didn't believe him after all? What if Marissa managed to talk her way out of this? Rich people got out of things. Everyone knew that. They had lawyers, connections, ways of making problems disappear. Marissa's eyes darted around the cafe, searching for an escape, an ally, anything. Her chest rose and fell rapidly beneath her designer blouse. The once polished charm she wore so effortlessly was unraveling by the second, replaced by something raw and desperate. Bernard let go of her wrist but kept his gaze locked on her. "Sit down, Marissa." She didn't move. "I said sit down." Slowly, reluctantly, she lowered herself back into her chair, but her body remained rigid, coiled like an animal preparing to spring. Bernard turned his attention to Malik. The boy stood frozen, unsure if he was supposed to stay or slip away while everyone was distracted. But Bernard's voice cut through his uncertainty. "Malik, is it?" The boy nodded, his throat too dry to speak. "Come closer," Bernard said, gesturing to the space beside the table. "You said you saw her put something in the soup. Can you describe it?" Malik stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. All those eyes on him, wealthy, judgmental eyes, made him feel small, but he forced himself to speak clearly. "It was a small bottle," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "Like one you'd use for medicine, clear liquid. She poured it in when you were looking at your phone, then stirred it with the spoon." "I swear I saw it." Bernard's face tightened. He turned to Marissa, who was already shaking her head, her lips pressed into a thin line of denial. "This is absurd," she said, but her voice lacked the conviction it had moments ago. "He's lying. Why would I? Why would he lie?" Bernard interrupted quietly. What could he possibly gain from this? The question hung in the air unanswered. Marissa opened her mouth, then closed it. For a split second, her carefully crafted facade slipped completely. In that instant, she looked cornered, trapped. The mask of the perfect wife vanished, revealing something calculating beneath. Then, as if grasping at straws, she rounded on Malik with renewed fury. "You've been spying on us, haven't you?" she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "Trying to cause trouble because you're jealous of people who actually have something, people who matter." The words hit Malik like a physical blow. He felt the sting of them deep in his chest. People who matter. That's what she thought of him. That's what they all thought. A nobody, a street kid who didn't count, but he didn't look away. "I'm not jealous," he said firmly, his voice rising just enough to carry across the silent cafe. "I saw what I saw, and I couldn't just stand there and let you hurt him." Something flickered in Bernard's eyes at those words. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. Marissa laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "Hurt him? This is my husband. Why would I hurt my own husband?" No one answered her. The silence was deafening. And then, cutting through the tension like a siren, came the sound of police cruisers approaching. The wails grew louder, closer, until two officers entered the cafe, their hands resting on their belts, their expressions professionally neutral. The room seemed to shrink as they approached the table. Patrons parted like the Red Sea, giving them a clear path. "What's going on here?" one of the officers asked, his tone calm but authoritative. Bernard stood, his towering frame still commanding respect despite his age. "Officers, I need you to take a look at this." He gestured toward the bowl of soup, now cold and congealing on the table. "This boy claims my wife poisoned it." The officers exchanged glances, their expressions carefully blank. One of them leaned down, sniffing the bowl cautiously. He couldn't smell anything unusual, but that didn't mean much. Some poisons were odorless. He turned to Marissa. "Ma'am, do you have anything to say about this?" Her face flushed crimson. "This is ridiculous. He's just some street kid trying to make trouble. Bernard, you're really going to let this nonsense go this far?" But the officer wasn't buying her deflection. "We need to test the contents," he said, reaching for the bowl. "No," Marissa snapped, her voice rising to an almost shriek. The outburst drew even more attention. Every head in the cafe swiveled toward her. The officer paused, narrowing his eyes. "Ma'am, is there something you'd like to tell us before we proceed?" Marissa hesitated. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She looked at Bernard, really looked at him, and saw no mercy in his eyes. She looked at the officers, at their steady, waiting gazes. She looked at the crowd, at the phones recording everything. Her hands trembled as she clutched her handbag to her chest. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, finally, her resolve crumbled. "Fine," she spat, her voice low but dripping with venom. "You want the truth? Fine." The cafe leaned in collectively, sensing they were about to witness something monumental. Marissa's eyes blazed with a mixture of hatred and desperation. "I'm tired of living in his shadow, tired of his control over everything. Do you know what it's like to be married to a man who treats you like another one of his assets, another acquisition?" Bernard stared at her, his face unreadable. He was never supposed to make it past this year, Marissa continued, her voice gaining strength even as her composure shattered completely. The insurance alone, she stopped abruptly, realizing too late that she'd said too much. The cafe erupted. Gasps echoed off the stone walls. Some patrons clutched their chests in shock. Others pulled out their phones if they hadn't already, recording furiously. The officer stepped forward, his expression grim. "Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder. Please put your hands where I can see them." Marissa's composure shattered entirely. "No, you don't understand. I deserved everything he had, everything," she screamed, trying to wriggle free as the officers secured her hands behind her back. It took both officers to control her. She thrashed and kicked, her designer heels skidding against the stone floor, her perfect hair now a tangled mess. "This isn't over," she shrieked as they led her away. "Do you hear me? This isn't over." Her voice echoed through the stunned cafe, fading only as they pushed through the patio gates toward the waiting cruiser. Silence descended. Bernard sank back into his chair like a man whose strings had been cut. His hand trembled as he pushed the bowl of soup away, far away to the edge of the table where it couldn't hurt anyone. For a long moment he said nothing. His face was a mask of disbelief and betrayal. His wife, the woman he had trusted, loved, provided everything for, she had been planning to kill him. Insurance money, for freedom from his control. The weight of it pressed down on him, visible in the slump of his shoulders, the distant look in his eyes. Then his gaze found Malik. The boy stood frozen near the table, unsure of what to do next. The drama was over. The police had taken Marissa away. Should he leave now, slip back into invisibility like he always did? But as Bernard's eyes met his, something unexpected happened. The anger and betrayal in the old man's expression softened. A flicker of gratitude replaced it. Then something else, wonder almost. Malik hadn't just saved his life. He had revealed a truth Bernard would have never seen coming. A truth that would have killed him one way or another. Bernard opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He simply stared at the boy, this thin, hungry child in a tattered hoodie, and saw him for the first time. Really saw him. The cafe slowly returned to a low hum of whispers and murmurs as the officer's cruiser pulled away, Marissa's protests fading into the distance. Patrons exchanged wide-eyed glances, still reeling from what they had witnessed. Some looked at Bernard with pity, others with curiosity, a few with something like respect for the boy who had spoken up. But Malik didn't move. He stood rooted to the spot, unsure if he was supposed to stay or slip away quietly back to the streets where he belonged. Bernard gestured to the seat across from him, the one Marissa had occupied just minutes ago. "Malik," he said softly, "sit." The boy hesitated, glancing around at the onlookers, but something in Bernard's voice carried a weight that made him obey. Slowly, awkwardly, he sank into the chair, his thin frame almost swallowed by the elegant seat. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the billionaire and the beggar, connected now by an act of courage neither had expected. Bernard spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved my life." Malik fidgeted, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I couldn't let it happen," he said quietly. "I couldn't just watch and say nothing." Bernard nodded slowly, his gaze distant for a moment as if replaying the entire ordeal in his mind. "Most people would have," he said after a pause. "They would have turned the other way, pretended they didn't see, told themselves it wasn't their business." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. But you didn't. That took courage, boy, real courage. Malik shrugged, looking down at the table. I don't like seeing people get hurt, that's all. Bernard studied him for a long moment. For the first time, he seemed to really see the boy not just as a scrappy kid on the streets, but as someone with a story, a soul. "How long have you been out here?" he asked quietly. The question caught Malik off guard. He looked away, his voice tinged with embarrassment he couldn't quite hide. "A while." Bernard frowned but didn't press. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black phone. "Wait here," he said, standing and stepping aside to make a call. Malik watched him, anxiety creeping back into his chest. Was he in trouble now? Was Bernard going to call someone to have him removed? That's how these things usually went. Help the street kid until he becomes inconvenient, then make him disappear. But when Bernard returned, his expression was calm, almost kind. "Help is on the way," he said simply. Malik's brow furrowed. "Help," Bernard nodded. "I called someone I trust. They'll make sure you have a place to sleep tonight, somewhere safe, hot food, a warm bed." He paused. "And if you'll let me, I'd like to do more than that." The boy's eyes widened. "You don't have to do that," he said quickly, his voice defensive. "I didn't do this for money or anything. I just—" "I know," Bernard interrupted gently. "That's exactly why I want to help." He leaned forward, his voice low and sincere. "You did something today that most people wouldn't have done, Malik. You saw someone in danger, a complete stranger, and you acted. Not for reward, not for recognition, because it was the right thing to do." He paused. "Trust me, boy. If the world had more people like you, it would be a much better place." For the first time in a long while, Malik felt a warmth he couldn't quite describe. It spread through his chest, loosening the knots of fear and hunger and loneliness that had become his constant companions. He looked down at the table, unsure of what to say. Words felt inadequate, too small for what he was feeling. The cafe patrons began to disperse, their lunches forgotten, their gossip fresh. But the weight of what had happened lingered in the air like perfume. Bernard picked up his glass of water, taking a long sip before speaking again. "Sometimes life gives us the chance to change someone else's story," he said thoughtfully. "You changed mine today, Malik. And maybe, just maybe, I can help change yours." The boy glanced up at him, his dark eyes glistening with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. The afternoon sun continued its slow arc across the sky, casting long shadows across the cafe patio. Most patrons had drifted away, their appetites for lunch replaced by an insatiable hunger for gossip. They would call friends, post on social media, relive the moment they witnessed a billionaire's wife arrested for attempted murder. But Bernard and Malik remained at the table, two unlikely figures connected by fate. Bernard set his phone down and studied the boy across from him. Really studied him. The hollow cheeks, the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands instinctively covered his stomach, as if trying to quiet the hunger gnawing inside. "When did you last eat?" Bernard asked quietly. Malik hesitated, as if calculating whether honesty would be used against him. "Yesterday, maybe the day before. I found half a sandwich in a trash can near the station." Bernard's jaw tightened. Half a sandwich. From a trash can. Meanwhile, he had just watched his wife try to poison him over a lunch that cost more than this boy probably saw in a month. He signaled to the waiter, who approached cautiously, still rattled by the afternoon's events. "Bring this young man whatever he wants from the menu," Bernard said. "Anything at all, and bring me a coffee, black." The waiter nodded quickly and hurried away. Malik stared at Bernard, confusion written across his face. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Bernard interrupted gently. "I want to humor an old man who just discovered his wife wanted him dead. Let me do something that feels good today." Malik fell silent, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to kindness without strings attached. In his world, everything came with a price. The waiter returned moments later with a basket of fresh bread and butter, setting it in front of Malik with something like reverence. "The kitchen is preparing a full meal for you, sir. It will be out shortly, sir." No one had ever called Malik sir before. He looked at the bread, his hands trembling as he reached for a piece. The warmth of it seeped into his fingers. He brought it to his nose, inhaling the yeasty scent like it was the finest perfume. Then he tore into it, barely remembering to chew before swallowing. Bernard watched him eat, saying nothing. He had seen poverty before, of course. Read reports, donated to charities, sat on boards of organizations designed to help the homeless. But he had never sat across from it. Never looked into the eyes of a child who had gone days without food while he debated which of his 3 homes to visit for the weekend. The bread disappeared in moments. Malik reached for another piece, then stopped himself, embarrassed by his own desperation. "Eat," Bernard said. "All of it, there's more coming." Malik didn't need to be told twice. By the time the main course arrived, a generous plate of grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and mashed potatoes, Malik had finished half the bread basket. He stared at the plate like it was a work of art. "It's for you," Bernard said. "Go ahead." Malik picked up the fork. It felt foreign in his hand, heavier than the plastic utensils he was used to. He took a bite of chicken and actually moaned. The sound escaped before he could stop it, and his face flushed with embarrassment. But Bernard only smiled. A real smile, not the practiced expression he used in boardrooms and charity galas. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the tension of the afternoon slowly dissolving. When Malik finally pushed his plate away, looking almost pained by how full he was, Bernard leaned forward. "Can you tell me about yourself, Malik? How did you end up on the streets?" The boy's guard went up immediately. His eyes shifted away. "It's not important." "It's important to me," Bernard said. "You saved my life. The least I can do is listen to your story." Malik was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly the words began to come. "It was my mom. She got sick 2 years ago, really sick. Cancer, they said. We didn't have insurance or anything. She worked cleaning houses, but when she got sick, she couldn't work anymore. We lost our apartment." Bernard listened without interrupting. "I tried to help. I was 10, but I looked older. I found odd jobs, carrying groceries, sweeping sidewalks, anything. But it wasn't enough. The shelter let us stay for a while, but then Mom got worse. She had to go to the hospital." His voice cracked. He looked down at the table. "She died 6 months ago. I didn't have anyone else. No dad, no grandparents, just me. The shelter said I couldn't stay alone because I was a minor, but I didn't want to go into the system. I'd heard things, so I left." Bernard's expression remained calm, but something shifted behind his eyes. Rage, perhaps. Not at Malik, but at a system that allowed a child to slip through its cracks. "You've been alone for 6 months?" he asked. Malik nodded. "I know places to sleep. Underpasses, abandoned buildings, sometimes the train station if the cops don't kick me out. I figured out which restaurants throw food out at night, which markets have fruit that's too bruised to sell. You learn." Bernard shook his head slowly. "You're 12 years old. 13 last month. Well, I think so. Mom wasn't sure about the exact date. 13." Bernard thought about his own grandchildren, privileged, pampered, complaining about which private school they preferred. They had never known hunger, never known fear, never known what it meant to survive. The waiter appeared again, this time with 2 cups of coffee and a tall glass of milk for Malik. Bernard thanked him and turned back to the boy. What would you do if you could do anything? If money and circumstances weren't obstacles? Malik blinked, clearly never having considered the question. I don't know. Go to school, I guess. Mom always wanted me to finish school. She said I was smart, said I could be something. She was right, Bernard said. You are smart and you are going to be something. Malik looked confused. What do you mean? Before Bernard could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his lawyer. He had called him earlier after the police left, setting things in motion. Excuse me for a moment, he said, stepping away from the table. Malik watched him go, then turned his attention to the glass of milk. Real milk, cold and fresh. He drank it slowly, savoring every drop. When Bernard returned, his expression was different, determined, focused. The way he looked before closing a major deal. Malik, I have a proposal for you. The boy tensed. Proposals usually meant trouble. People didn't offer things without wanting something in return. Bernard sat down across from him. I have a home, a big one. Too big for one person, honestly. It has empty bedrooms, a full kitchen, a library with more books than anyone could read in a lifetime. He paused. I'd like you to come stay with me tonight and for as long as you need. Malik's mouth fell open. What? No, I can't, I don't. You don't have to decide forever, Bernard said calmly. Just tonight. Tomorrow we can talk more, but you shouldn't sleep on the streets again, not after what you did for me. But I told you I didn't do it for. I know. Bernard's voice was gentle but firm. That's exactly why I'm offering, not because you earned it with a good deed, because you're a child who deserves better than garbage sandwiches and concrete beds. Malik's eyes welled up. He blinked rapidly, fighting the tears. He had trained himself not to cry. Crying was weakness. Crying attracted attention. Crying changed nothing. But something about this old man's kindness broke through his defenses. Why? He whispered. Why do you care? You don't even know me. Bernard reached across the table and placed his hand on Malik's thin arm. Because someone should have cared a long time ago. Because you reminded me today what really matters in this world. Because I have more than I could ever use and you have less than anyone should. He paused. And because I think your mother was right. I think you can be something, and I'd like to help. A single tear escaped, trailing down Malik's cheek. He wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Bernard said simply. Just for tonight, we'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Malik looked at him, really looked at him, at the kindness in his tired eyes, at the sincerity in his voice, at the hand still resting on his arm, warm and solid. For 6 months he had trusted no one. Trust was dangerous. Trust got you hurt. But something about Bernard felt different. Okay, he whispered. Just for tonight. Bernard smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and softened the hard edges of his face. Good. Now finish your milk. My car will be here soon. As Malik drained the last of the milk, Bernard's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then showed the screen to Malik. It was a news alert. The headline read, Billionaire's wife arrested in shocking poison plot, homeless boy credited with saving his life. Malik's eyes went wide. That's me, Bernard nodded. That's you. You're a hero, Malik. Whether you like it or not. The boy stared at the screen, watching his story spread across the internet. Comments poured in praise, shock, offers of support. People wanted to help him. People wanted to know him. It was overwhelming. Bernard seemed to sense his discomfort. He put the phone away. Forget that for now. Let's focus on what comes next. And what comes next is a hot shower, a soft bed, and breakfast in the morning. Everything else can wait. Malik nodded slowly, still processing. As they stood to leave, Bernard placed a hand on his shoulder. You saved my life today, Malik, but I have a feeling you might have saved yours too. They walked out of the cafe together, the billionaire and the boy leaving behind the scene of the crime and stepping into an uncertain but hopeful future. The car was waiting, a sleek black sedan that made Malik's jaw drop. The driver held the door open, and Malik climbed in, sinking into leather seats softer than anything he had ever felt. As the car pulled away from the curb, he watched the cafe disappear behind them, the place where everything changed. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in 6 months, he wasn't afraid of finding out. The car glided through the city streets, smooth and silent. Malik pressed his face against the window, watching his old world pass by. The underpass where he'd slept last week, the convenience store where the clerk sometimes let him warm up for a few minutes, the park bench that had been his bed more nights than he could count. All of it looked different from inside a heated car with leather seats. Bernard watched him quietly from the opposite seat. He had chosen to sit facing Malik, giving the boy space while remaining present. Decades of negotiating had taught him when to push and when to wait. Right now, waiting was the right move. The car turned onto a private road, flanked by tall hedges perfectly trimmed. Iron gates swung open silently, welcoming them onto a property that seemed to stretch forever. Malik's eyes grew wider with each passing second. They pulled up to a house. No, not a house. A mansion. Stone and glass rose multiple stories, with columns flanking the entrance and lights glowing warmly from within. Fountains dotted the landscape. Gardens stretched in every direction. Malik's voice came out as a whisper. You live here. Among other places, Bernard said with a slight smile. It's just a building, walls and rooms. What matters is the people inside. Tonight, that's just you and me and a small staff who take care of the place. The door opened, and a kindly woman in a simple dress stood waiting. She smiled at Malik with genuine warmth. This is Mrs. Patterson, Bernard said. She runs the household. If you need anything at all, she's the one to ask. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her eyes soft as they took in the thin boy in the oversized hoodie. Welcome, dear. I've prepared the blue room for you. It has its own bathroom and a lovely view of the garden. Malik didn't know what to say. His own bathroom, a view. He followed her inside like he was walking through a dream. The entrance hall alone was bigger than the apartment he'd shared with his mother. A sweeping staircase curved upward, chandeliers sparkled overhead, and artwork lined the walls, real paintings, not posters. Mrs. Patterson led him up the stairs and down a long hallway, finally stopping at a door painted a soft cream color. She pushed it open. The room was massive. A bed sat against one wall, covered in what looked like a dozen pillows and blankets so fluffy they seemed to float. A desk sat by the window, stocked with paper and pens. A bookshelf held books for someone his age. An en-suite bathroom gleamed with white tile and a shower bigger than any he'd seen. There are clothes in the closet, Mrs. Patterson said gently. Nothing fancy, just comfortable things we picked up quickly. Tomorrow, if you need anything else, we can shop. Malik turned to her, his eyes glistening. Why are you all being so nice to me? You don't even know me. She knelt down to his level, her wrinkled hand reaching out to touch his cheek. I know you saved Mr. Green's life. That's enough. But more than that, I know you're a child who needs kindness, and that's always enough. She left him alone then, closing the door softly behind her. Malik stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by silence and warmth. Then he walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower. Hot water, endless hot water, cascaded over him as he stood there, letting it wash away not just the dirt of the streets but the weight of 6 months alone. When he finally emerged, wrapped in a towel thicker than any blanket he'd owned, he found pajamas laid out on the bed. Soft flannel, they fit perfectly. He climbed into the bed and it swallowed him in comfort. The last thing he remembered before sleep took him was the feeling of safety, real safety. For the first time in 2 years, morning light streamed through the windows, warm and golden. Malik woke slowly, disoriented by the softness around him. Then memory flooded back, the cafe, the poison, Bernard, the mansion. He sat up quickly, half convinced it had all been a dream, but the room was still there. The clothes were still there. And when he looked out the window, the garden stretched below him, real and vivid. A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Patterson's voice followed. "Good morning, dear. Breakfast is ready whenever you are. Take your time." Breakfast. Real breakfast. He dressed in the clothes from the closet, jeans that fit, a sweater without holes, socks without matching. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the boy staring back. Downstairs, he found Bernard already seated at a table in a bright kitchen, reading a newspaper. The old man looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Malik. Sleep well." Malik nodded, sliding into the chair across from him. "I've never slept like that, ever." Bernard's smile widened. "Good. That's what beds are for." Mrs. Patterson appeared with plates, eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, pancakes, orange juice. Malik's eyes widened at the spread. "This is all for us." "You're a growing boy," Bernard said. "Eat what you like." Malik ate and ate and ate some more. Bernard sipped his coffee and watched with quiet satisfaction. When Malik finally pushed back, stuffed and happy, Bernard set down his cup. "We need to talk about the future," he said gently. "About what happens next." Malik's happiness flickered. "Of course." This was the part where the kindness ended, where they explained that last night was a one-time thing and now he had to go back. But Bernard continued. "I've spoken with my lawyers and some people I trust. There are options I'd like to present to you." "Options?" Bernard nodded. "First, you'll need proper documentation. A birth certificate, social security number, medical records. You exist, Malik, but officially you've fallen through the cracks. We can fix that." Malik listened, not quite understanding. "Second, school. Your mother wanted you to finish school, and I agree. You're smart. You deserve an education. I've already made some calls, and there's a good school not far from here that would welcome you." School. The word felt foreign. He hadn't been to school in 2 years. "Third," Bernard continued, "a place to live. You're welcome to stay here for as long as you need. This is your home now if you want it. Not because you saved my life, but because every child deserves a home." Malik's throat tightened. "I don't understand. You barely know me." Bernard leaned forward, his eyes intense but kind. "I know enough. I know you're brave. I know you're honest. I know you have a good heart. And I know that I have more than I need and you have less than you deserve. That's enough for me." The tears came then, and Malik couldn't stop them. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with sobs he'd held in for months. Bernard didn't speak. He simply reached across the table and placed his hand on Malik's arm, waiting. When the tears finally subsided, Malik looked up, his face blotchy but calm. "Why me?" he whispered. Bernard considered the question carefully before answering. I've spent my whole life acquiring things, money, power, influence. I told myself it mattered, and in some ways it does. But yesterday, a hungry boy in a dirty hoodie taught me what really matters: courage, selflessness, the willingness to risk everything for a stranger. He paused, his own eyes glistening. You reminded me of the person I used to want to be, Malik, the person I forgot somewhere along the way. If I can help you become the person you're meant to be, maybe that's the most important thing I'll ever do. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the words settling between them. Then Malik spoke, his voice steady for the first time. I'd like to try school, and I'd like to stay here. If you really mean it. Bernard smiled, a full, genuine smile that erased years from his face. I really mean it. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, dabbing at her own eyes with a handkerchief. I'll start the paperwork for school enrollment, she said softly. And Malik, if you'd like, after breakfast, I can show you around the property. There's a library you won't believe. Malik nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he was looking forward to tomorrow. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of new experiences. Malik visited a doctor for the first time in years, received vaccinations, got glasses, discovering that the world was actually sharp and clear, not blurry like he'd always assumed. A tutor came to the house to assess his academic level, and the news surprised everyone. Malik was brilliant. Despite 2 years without schooling, he tested at or above grade level in most subjects. His mother had taught him well, reading with him every night, drilling math facts, nurturing the curiosity that had kept him alive on the streets. He's gifted, the tutor told Bernard privately. With proper support, there's no limit to what he can achieve. Bernard nodded, satisfaction warming his chest. Then that's what he'll get, proper support. The day arrived for Malik to start school. He stood in the entrance hall, dressed in a uniform Mrs. Patterson had procured, looking nervous but determined. Bernard walked him to the car. First day jitters are normal, he said. But you're going to do great. You know why? Malik shook his head. Because you're the bravest person I know. And if you can face down a murderer in a cafe, you can handle middle school. Malik laughed, a real laugh, bright and unexpected. It was the first time Bernard had heard that sound, and it made his heart swell. As the car pulled away, Bernard stood watching, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He had spent his life building an empire. But standing here, watching a boy go to school, he realized that this simple act of caring meant more than any deal he'd ever closed. The empire could wait. This boy could not. And for the first time in decades, Bernard Greene knew exactly what mattered most. 6 months had passed since the day everything changed. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches, their cameras trained on the front of the room where Marissa Green sat at the defense table, her designer clothes replaced by a plain gray suit. Her hair, once perfectly styled, hung limp and unwashed. The polish had worn away, revealing something hollow underneath. Bernard sat in the front row, dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. Beside him sat Malik, also in a suit, his first real suit, purchased for this occasion. The boy sat straight-backed, his hands folded in his lap, watching the proceedings with eyes that had seen too much for his age. The prosecution had spent 3 days presenting evidence. The vial, recovered from Marissa's handbag during a search of her belongings. Traces of a rare, odorless poison, one that caused heart failure within hours, mimicking a natural death. Insurance documents showing she stood to gain millions. Phone records revealing conversations with a man who had since been arrested for selling her the poison. Today, the defense would present its case, but everyone in the room knew how this would end. Marissa's lawyer rose, a man in an expensive suit who clearly wished he were anywhere else. The defense calls Malik Williams to the stand. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Malik felt Bernard's hand on his arm. "You don't have to do this," Bernard said quietly. "You've already given your statement." The prosecutor said, "I want to," Malik interrupted. "She should see me. She should know that she didn't win." Bernard studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then go, tell the truth, that's all you need to do." Malik walked to the witness stand, his steps steady despite the 100 pairs of eyes watching him. He was sworn in, took his seat, and faced the courtroom. The defense attorney approached, his expression attempting friendliness. "Malik, you're 13 years old now, is that correct?" "Yes, sir." "And on the day in question you were living on the streets, hungry, desperate, is that fair to say?" Objections rose and were overruled. The attorney was establishing his narrative. "Yes, sir, I was hungry." "And you saw an opportunity, didn't you? A wealthy man, a distracted wife, a chance to insert yourself into their lives." Malik's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "I saw a woman pour something into a man's soup. I told him not to eat it." The attorney pressed on, trying to find cracks in the story, inconsistencies he could exploit. But Malik answered each question with the same simple honesty. He hadn't gained anything. He hadn't planned anything. He had simply seen wrong and tried to stop it. After an hour of questioning, the attorney sat down, frustrated. The prosecution declined to redirect. The judge looked at Malik with something like respect. "You may step down, young man. Thank you for your testimony." As Malik passed the defense table, Marissa's eyes followed him. For a moment their gazes met. Malik didn't flinch, didn't look away. He held her stare until she dropped her eyes first. He returned to his seat beside Bernard, who placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did well." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, Marissa's face was pale. She knew. Everyone knew. The foreman stood as the judge asked for the verdict. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." Marissa's knees buckled. Her lawyer caught her arm, but she shook him off, turning to face Bernard with wild eyes. "You did this," she screamed, her composure shattering completely. "You and that street rat, I hope you rot together." The bailiffs moved quickly, restraining her as she thrashed and shouted. They dragged her toward the side door that led to holding cells, her screams echoing off the marble walls. Bernard watched her go, his expression unchanged. Then he turned to Malik. "Let's go home." The car ride was quiet. Malik stared out the window, processing everything. Bernard sat beside him, giving him space. Finally, Malik spoke. "Do you think she really would have done it? Killed you, I mean?" Bernard considered the question carefully. "I think she believed she would. I think she convinced herself that I deserved it, that she was justified. People can believe almost anything when it serves their purpose." But she was wrong. Yes, she was wrong, and now she'll spend a long time thinking about just how wrong she was. They rode in silence for a while longer. "She called me a street rat," Malik said quietly. Bernard turned to look at him. "She called you a lot of things. None of them true. Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Malik shook his head. "I see a young man who faced impossible circumstances and never lost his humanity. I see someone brave enough to speak up when everyone else stayed silent. I see my family." The word hung in the air. Family. Malik's eyes welled up, but he blinked the tears away. "I've never really had family, not since Mom." You have one now, Bernard said simply, if you want it. Malik didn't answer with words. He simply leaned over and rested his head against Bernard's shoulder, the way a son might lean against his father. Bernard's arm came up, wrapping around the boy, holding him close. That evening they sat together in the library, a fire crackling in the hearth. Malik was doing homework algebra, which he had come to love, while Bernard read a book. Mrs. Patterson brought hot chocolate and cookies, setting them on the table between them. "Thank you," Malik said, looking up. She smiled, her eyes soft. "Of course, dear." When she left, Malik turned to Bernard. "Can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you do it? Take me in, I mean. You could have just thanked me and sent me on my way, given me some money. That's what most people would have done." Bernard set down his book and considered the question. "I've been thinking about that a lot, actually, and I think I needed you as much as you needed me." Malik looked confused. Bernard continued. "I spent my whole life building things, companies, wealth, a reputation, but I never built anything that mattered. My marriages failed. My children barely speak to me. I was rich and powerful and completely alone." He paused, his eyes distant. "When you shouted, 'Don't eat that,' you weren't just saving my life. You were waking me up, reminding me that there's more to this world than deals and dollars, that courage and kindness still exist, that I could still be part of something real." Malik was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. "My mom used to say that people come into your life for a reason. She said even the hard times teach you something." He looked at Bernard. "I think she sent me to that café that day. I think she knew I needed you." Bernard's eyes glistened. "And I needed you." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, the cookies slowly disappearing. The months turned into years. Malik thrived in school, his natural intelligence flowering under proper care and attention. He discovered a love for science, spending hours in the lab, dreaming of becoming a doctor someday, the kind who helped people who couldn't afford help. Bernard gradually stepped back from his empire, handing day-to-day operations to trusted executives. He spent his time on things that mattered: Malik's school events, quiet evenings at home, the simple pleasure of watching a boy become a man. They traveled together, Bernard showing Malik the world, Malik showing Bernard how to see it with fresh eyes. They visited the places Malik's mother had always dreamed of seeing, carrying her memory with them. When Malik graduated high school with honors, Bernard sat in the front row, tears streaming down his face. When Malik was accepted to medical school on a full scholarship, Bernard threw a party that lasted all weekend. And when Malik, now a young man, stood before a courtroom full of people to accept an award for his work providing free medical care to homeless youth, he began his speech the same way. "I wouldn't be here today if not for a woman named Sarah Williams, my mother, who taught me that kindness matters even when you have nothing. And I wouldn't be here without a man named Bernard Green, who taught me that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be." In the audience, an old man in a wheelchair wiped his eyes and smiled. 5 years later, Bernard passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Malik holding his hand. At the funeral, Malik spoke of the man who had saved him as surely as he had saved Bernard, of the unlikely friendship that had blossomed from a single act of courage, of the family they had built together from nothing. And when he finished, he looked out at the crowd, at the reporters, the business associates, the curious onlookers, and said something that would be quoted for years to come. "Courage doesn't wear a suit. Kindness doesn't come with a price tag." Sometimes the people we overlook have the greatest strength of all. My father, Bernard Green, taught me that, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of his love. He stepped down from the podium and walked to the graveside, placing a single flower on the casket. Then he turned and walked toward his future, carrying Bernard's memory in his heart and his mother's dreams in his soul. Malik Williams went on to become a renowned physician, opening free clinics in 3 cities. He named the first one after his mother, Sarah, the second after Bernard Green. He never forgot where he came from, and he never stopped being grateful for the day a homeless boy shouted, "Don't eat that." If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs a reminder that even small actions can create life-changing impacts.